The rain had not stopped for days. It fell like rivers from the sky, pounding the small village nestled between the mountains. The river near the village swelled, its waters rising faster than anyone could control. Homes shook, and people screamed as their belongings floated away. Amidst the chaos, a young girl named Alara ran through the muddy streets, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She clutched nothing but a small satchel, her only thoughts on survival and helping those she could. As she reached the edge of the flooded river, she saw something unusual, something tiny, struggling, and terrified. A small creature, barely bigger than a chicken, was being tossed by the violent waves. Its scales glistened even under the gray sky, shimmering like emerald fire. Alara's heart skipped a beat. A dragon hatchling. She had only heard stories of dragons from old village tales, stories adults said were just myths. But here it was, alive and in danger. Without thinking, she waded into the rushing water. The current tugged at her legs, threatening to sweep her away. Villagers shouted for her to come back, but Alara ignored them. The hatchling's tiny claws reached out, and it let out a weak, pitiful cry. Alara's hands trembled as she reached for it. The water was icy, biting her skin, but she did not let go. With one strong pull, she managed to lift the dragon from the river. It squirmed in her arms, snapping its tiny jaws, and a small flame flickered from its mouth, startling her. "Alara, get back!" someone shouted from the riverbank. But she didn't move. The hatchling's eyes met hers, filled with fear and trust all at once. It was as if the creature knew she was the only one who could save it. With a last effort, she stumbled toward a higher rock, holding it tightly. The waves roared around her, but she finally reached safety. The villagers watched in awe and fear. No one had seen a dragon in generations. They whispered among themselves, unsure if this was a blessing or a curse. Alara, shivering and exhausted, hugged the hatchling close. "You're safe now," she whispered, even though she herself wasn't sure if the river would relent. That night, the floodwaters receded a little, but the destruction was everywhere. Homes were gone, livestock lost, and the villagers mourned what they had lost. But in a small cave near the forest, Alara sat by a fire, the hatchling curled in her lap. Its scales glowed faintly in the dark, warming her cold hands. She had no idea what kind of adventures awaited them, but she felt a strange connection to this tiny dragon. She named it Ember. Days passed, but the danger had not disappeared. Villagers were wary of the dragon, fearing its power. Some suggested it should be killed, but Alara refused. She spent hours feeding Ember, caring for it, and even speaking to it as if it could understand every word. And somehow it did. The hatchling nuzzled her when she spoke, its small flames flickering brighter as if acknowledging her words. One evening, a storm brewed again, stronger than before. The villagers panicked, thinking the worst flood yet was coming. Alara, however, stayed by Ember, determined to protect him. As the wind howled and lightning split the sky, she noticed something strange. The hatchling's eyes glowed, brighter than ever, and suddenly a wave of heat radiated from its tiny body. The water around them slowed, as if Ember was fighting the flood with an invisible power. Alara's eyes widened. Dragons weren't just stories. They were real, and Ember had powers beyond imagination. The villagers watched from a distance, mouths agape. Fear mixed with awe as the small dragon's light cut through the darkness. They had never seen such a sight, and no one could explain it. Alara, holding Ember close, felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the little dragon could help rebuild what the flood had destroyed. That night, as the rain finally eased, Alara sat with Ember, her thoughts racing. "I'll protect you," she whispered. "No matter what comes, we'll survive together." Ember blinked slowly, curling closer to her. It was a silent promise, but Alara felt it deep in her heart. She didn't know what the future held, or how dangerous the world could become, but she knew one thing. This dragon and she were bound together now. The villagers, still murmuring about the strange events, began to see her differently. Brave, kind, and fearless. A girl who defied the floods, defied fear, and saved a creature that could change everything. Rumors began to spread beyond the village. A girl had rescued a dragon hatchling. The legend had begun, and no one yet knew how far it would go. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the mountains, shadowy eyes watched them both. Someone or something had taken notice of Ember. The hatchling wasn't just special. It was extraordinary, and its bond with Alara was about to become a story the world would never forget. After the flood, life slowly returned to the village, but Alara's world had changed forever. Ember, the dragon hatchling she had saved, was no longer just a creature of legend. He was her secret companion, her friend, and in many ways her family. Every morning, before the villagers woke, she would sneak into the forest with Ember, carrying food and water. He had grown slightly, but still small enough to hide from curious eyes. The forest became their sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through the leaves, casting golden patterns on the mossy ground. Birds chirped above, and the wind whispered through the trees. Alara often wondered if anyone would ever understand the bond she shared with Ember. When she spoke to him, he seemed to listen, tilting his head, blinking, or letting out a soft hiss. Sometimes, she could swear he nodded as if he understood every word. Days passed in quiet happiness, but danger was never far. Rumors of a dragon spread quickly, even though no one had seen Ember clearly. Some villagers spoke in hushed tones, warning of evil magic, while others whispered about treasure and power. Alara knew they could never know the truth. If Ember were discovered, he might be taken, or worse. One afternoon, while exploring a hidden glade, Alara noticed Ember acting strangely. He pawed at the ground and sniffed the air, his tail flicking nervously. Then, with a sudden leap, he bounded into a thick thicket and let out a low growl. Alara followed cautiously. There, in the shadows, she saw a figure watching them. A tall man, cloaked in dark robes, his eyes hidden, yet his gaze fixed firmly on Ember. "Who's there?" Alara demanded, fear tightening her chest. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised a hand, then vanished into the trees. Ember hissed, a small puff of smoke curling from his nostrils. Alara's heart pounded. Someone had seen them. But who? And why? That night, she could not sleep. She sat by Ember, who was curled up against her, glowing faintly in the moonlight. "We have to be careful," she whispered. "Someone knows about you now. I promise, I will protect you, no matter what." Ember let out a soft, reassuring hiss, as if he understood. The next days were filled with training and secret games. Alara taught Ember to hide, to recognize danger, and to listen to her commands. He learned quickly, his small wings flapping with energy as he practiced short flights. She laughed as he tumbled in the air, landing clumsily but always returning to her side. Their bond grew stronger every day, filled with laughter, love, and trust. But the shadow of the stranger lingered. At the edge of the forest, strange footprints appeared. Ember would growl when they came near, and Alara's stomach twisted with worry. Was the stranger alone? Did he mean harm, or was he searching for something else? Every day brought new questions, and Alara realized the forest could no longer be entirely safe. One evening, while gathering herbs near the river, Alara heard whispers carried by the wind. Faint, unintelligible words, almost like a chant. Ember's body stiffened, his small horns glowing faintly. He let out a warning hiss, and Alara's heart raced. The forest seemed to shift around them, shadows stretching unnaturally. Something or someone was moving, unseen but very close. Suddenly, a branch snapped. Alara spun around, clutching Ember to her chest. There, standing silently among the trees, was the stranger again. This time, she could see his eyes, cold, calculating, and filled with knowledge she could not understand. Before she could speak, he disappeared again, leaving only a whisper of his cloak in the wind. Alara shivered but did not cry. "We can face this together, Ember," she whispered. He nudged her cheek with his snout, a tiny flame flickering from his mouth as if agreeing. She knew the days ahead would be dangerous. Someone was watching, someone who wanted Ember for reasons she could not yet understand. But she also knew this. She would not let him go. From that night onward, their adventures grew bolder. They explored hidden caves, learned the sounds of the forest, and discovered places where no human dared to go. Each day, Ember grew stronger, and the villagers continued to murmur about the strange girl and the dragon in the forest. Some called her a witch. Others said she had been chosen by the dragon. None of them knew the truth, and none of them would guess what was coming. Elara often wondered if Ember remembered his family, the dragons he had left behind. But she knew that, for now, he belonged with her. They were bound together by a moment of courage, a flood, and a choice to save life when no one else dared. That bond, she realized, could withstand anything, even the dark stranger watching from the forest shadows. And somewhere, far beyond the village, plans were beginning to form. Someone powerful had learned of Ember. Someone who understood the magic of dragons. Elara did not yet know it, but the moment she had saved a tiny hatchling in a flood would set the stage for events that could change the world forever. Years passed, and the girl who had once saved a tiny dragon was no longer a child. Elara had grown taller, her hair glinting in the sun, her eyes still full of determination and kindness. Ember, the dragon hatchling she had rescued during the flood, had grown too, much larger now, his scales gleaming like molten emerald, wings strong and powerful. The villagers whispered in awe whenever they saw the pair in the forest, though most dared not approach. Elara and Ember's bond had grown deeper than words. They understood each other in ways no one else could. She could feel his emotions as he could feel hers. When Ember curled beside her at night, it was more than warmth. It was comfort, a silent promise of loyalty. And when he soared above her, she could sense his pride, as if he were protecting more than just himself. He was guarding the girl who had risked everything to save him. Life was not always peaceful. Sometimes hunters or greedy travelers would wander near the forest. Ember would roar, wings unfurling, his fire crackling in warning. But with Elara by his side, they always managed to escape danger. And yet, every adventure reminded her of something she had begun to feel in her heart. Ember's time in the forest would not last forever. One crisp morning, as the sun painted the forest gold, Ember landed heavily beside her. His eyes seemed serious, almost sad. He nudged her hand and then gazed toward the mountains, where clouds gathered like a warning. Elara felt a pang in her heart. Somehow she knew. Ember was calling her attention to the world beyond the forest, a world she had never known but that he seemed to understand. Days later, the signs became clearer. Ember became restless, pacing the forest clearing, sniffing the air, and occasionally letting out low, mournful hisses. One night, under the silver light of a full moon, he rose high into the sky and let out a roar that echoed across the valley. Elara ran after him, tears streaming down her face. "Ember, what is it? Why are you leaving?" she cried. But he could not answer in words. Instead, he landed gently beside her, nuzzling her face. Then, with a final look, he spread his wings and flew toward the distant mountains. She tried to call him back, but the wind carried his roar further and further away. For days, she waited by the mountain path, hoping he would return. Villagers noticed her absence, worried, but she ignored them. Her heart ached, but she knew Ember was not gone forever. She had saved him once, and now he was returning to a place he had to be, perhaps to protect others of his kind or to fulfill a destiny she could not yet imagine. During that time, Elara found herself reflecting on all they had shared. Every flight, every secret meeting in the forest, every whispered conversation. Ember had not just been a dragon. He had been her friend, her protector, and her family. And she had given him the gift of life when no one else had. That gift had bound them together, in ways that neither time nor distance could break. The farewell was heart-wrenching. As Ember's massive wings carried him higher, she ran along the forest edge, tears flowing freely. "I will wait for you," she whispered. I will be here when you return. Always. Ember circled once in the sky, a silent promise in his glowing eyes, and then vanished among the clouds. For weeks, she wandered the forest alone, feeling the emptiness where Ember had once been. Yet, she could sense his presence, faintly, in the wind, in the rustling leaves, and in the warmth of the sun. It was a strange comfort. Even in his absence, their bond remained unbroken. And far beyond the mountains, hidden from sight, Ember looked back at the forest. His heart ached for the girl who had saved him, the girl who had trusted him completely. But he had a duty now, a purpose that required him to leave. Somewhere out there, other dragons awaited, a world full of challenges and dangers. Yet he knew, without doubt, that one day he would return to her, stronger, wiser, and ready to repay the kindness she had shown him in his most vulnerable moment. Back in the village, people spoke in hushed tones about the girl and the dragon. Some doubted she had ever had a real companion, thinking it a tale born from imagination. But those who had seen Ember knew the truth. Alara had shared her life with a creature of legend, a dragon unlike any other. And though Ember had left, the story was far from over. Something extraordinary was brewing, something that would change Alara's life forever. Even in farewell, the suspense lingered. Who was the mysterious figure watching them? What awaited Ember among the mountains? And most importantly, when would the dragon return? These questions weighed on Alara's heart, but she held on to hope. Hope that the bond they shared, forged in a flood and nurtured through years, would one day bring them together again. Years rolled by, and Alara grew into a young woman. Her hair flowed like dark silk, her eyes shone with determination, and her heart carried memories of the dragon she had saved so long ago. Life in the village had returned to a quiet rhythm. Crops grew, rivers calmed, and people slowly rebuilt what the flood had destroyed. Yet, despite the peace, something in Alara felt different. The forest was quieter without Ember. She often wandered its paths, searching for traces of her friend. At times, she thought she saw a shadow gliding between the trees, only to find it was a bird or a trick of the sunlight. Still, a spark of hope burned in her chest. She believed Ember would return. She had to believe. Strange signs began to appear. One morning, the river near the village swirled unnaturally, as though stirred by some invisible force. Leaves danced in spirals, and the wind carried a low, rumbling sound. Villagers noticed too, but they dismissed it as old superstition. Only Alara knew the truth. These were not ordinary signs. They were warnings, messages from a dragon. One evening, while walking along the mountain path, Alara glimpsed something extraordinary. Shadows flew against the fiery sunset, large wings moving with power and grace. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be Ember, or were they other dragons? She clenched her fists, feeling both fear and excitement. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Life moved on, but the mysteries deepened. Farmers reported strange storms, stronger than any seen before. Travelers spoke of dragons glimpsed in distant skies. Villagers whispered in fear, some recalling the tales of a dragon hatchling that a girl had saved years ago. But no one had concrete proof, and the legend remained just that, a story until now. Alara could not ignore the signs. She began preparing for what she felt was coming. She trained herself to run faster, climb higher, and navigate the forests alone. She studied the mountains, noting every hidden path and cave, just in case Ember returned. Her nights were filled with dreams of dragons flying above her, and she would wake with a start, her heart pounding. One night, the wind carried a familiar scent, smoky and sweet, like Ember's tiny flames long ago. She froze. The scent was faint, distant, but it was unmistakable. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Ember, is it you?" The forest was silent, as though listening. Somewhere far away, her dragon friend was watching, feeling her call across the distance. Days later, villagers reported seeing shadows high in the clouds, moving in perfect formations. Alara's heart raced. She knew this was not just a single dragon anymore. Ember had grown, and he was not alone. There was a fleet, a group of dragons, powerful and majestic, returning to the world that had forgotten them. The suspense built with every passing day. The sky darkened with storm clouds, and the air vibrated with the distant roar of wings. Villagers whispered in panic, unsure whether the dragons would bring destruction or salvation. Alara stood at the edge of the forest, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her heart was full of hope and fear. She knew that when Ember returned, everything would change. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, the first silhouette appeared against the fiery sky, a massive winged shape soaring with grace and purpose. Alara's breath caught. It was Ember, strong, enormous, and magnificent, his scales glinting in the last rays of sunlight. Behind him, other dragons followed, forming a fleet that stretched across the horizon. The villagers gasped in awe and terror. Some ran, fearing an attack. Others froze, staring in disbelief. Alara did not move. She could hardly believe her eyes. Ember was back, and he had brought more. The moment was tense, filled with suspense. Would the dragons land peacefully, or would they unleash their power on the village that had once feared them? Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew the bond she shared with Ember was stronger than fear, stronger than time. She stepped forward, raising her hands. A faint glow emanated from Ember's eyes. He hovered above her, circling once, then slowly descended. The air was thick with anticipation. Every heartbeat felt like a drum of destiny. The other dragons followed, forming a protective circle around the village, their eyes fixed on the girl who had saved their companion years ago. For the first time in years, the villagers saw a miracle unfold. Alara had always believed in Ember, and now, she was about to witness the return of her friend in a way no one could have imagined. The suspense was unbearable. The world held its breath, waiting to see what the dragons would do next. The morning dawned with a strange, golden light. The villagers stirred, but unease hung heavy in the air. A low hum vibrated through the valley, like the whisper of wings too massive to be imagined. Alara stood at the edge of the forest, her heart pounding. She had waited for this day for years, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to see. Suddenly, a shadow swept across the village. She squinted toward the horizon. At first, it was just one dragon, Ember, soaring gracefully, his massive wings casting long shadows on the fields below. But then, more silhouettes appeared, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each one larger and more majestic than the last. A fleet of dragons, powerful and fierce, gliding in perfect formation, heading straight for the village. Villagers screamed and ran, some hiding behind carts, some clutching their children. Fear and awe mixed in the air. Alara, however, did not move. She felt a strange calm inside her. She knew these dragons were not here to destroy. They were here because of her. Ember had returned, and he had brought his kin to honor the girl who had once saved him from the flood. The dragons descended, circling the village. Their eyes glimmered like molten gold, and their wings beat the air in synchronized power. The sound was deafening, like a storm in the sky. Ember landed first, a shadowy figure against the rising sun, his massive claws gripping the earth with precision. His gaze met Alara's, and in that instant, no words were needed. A promise, a memory, a bond years of waiting condensed into one look. The villagers watched, frozen, as one by one, the dragons landed around the village. Some were gentle, lowering their heads to the ground. Others roared, not in anger, but in a deep, resonating call that seemed to shake the soul. It was both terrifying and beautiful, a spectacle no one would forget. Alara stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly. "Ember," she whispered. He nudged her gently with his snout, flames flickering softly from his nostrils. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Ember let out a mighty roar. The other dragons responded in chorus, a symphony of sound that echoed across the valley. It was as if they were acknowledging her, bowing to the girl who had saved one of their own. The suspense reached its peak. Would Ember let her approach? Would the dragons accept her presence? Or would they see her as an intruder? The villagers held their breath. The air was thick with anticipation. Alara, however, took a deep breath, stepping closer to Ember. The dragon lowered his massive head. Ember's eyes, glowing like molten fire, locked with hers. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt before her. The other dragons followed suit, kneeling or bowing their heads in respect. The villagers gasped in awe, witnessing a moment that could only be described as magical. The girl who had once been brave enough to wade into a flood to save a hatchling was now being honored by a fleet of dragons. It was a story that would be told for generations. But the spectacle was not only about honor. Ember nudged Alara's hand and then stepped back, signaling something even greater. He led her to the center of the dragon circle. The ground trembled slightly under the weight of so many dragons. The moment was tense. What was Ember about to do? With a soft, almost imperceptible flick of his tail, Ember signaled the others. One by one, the dragons bent their heads lower, as if pledging their loyalty. The villagers could hardly believe their eyes. Fear had turned into wonder. Alara felt a strange warmth in her heart, a sense of destiny she had never imagined. She realized that her life was no longer just that of a village girl. She had a role, a connection, and a power beyond the ordinary. And then, finally, Ember turned to the villagers, his roar echoing one last time, softer this time, almost like a blessing. He nudged Alara gently, and she knew it. The dragons were here to protect, to honor, and to follow her as their empress. The suspense melted into awe, the fear into admiration. The villagers, once skeptical and afraid, slowly approached. They marveled at the dragon's size, the shimmer of their scales, the intensity of their eyes. And Alara, standing among them, felt the weight of responsibility and the joy of reunion. Ember had returned not just as a friend, but as a symbol of hope, courage, and loyalty. The day ended with dragons circling high above, their shadows stretching across the village. Alara looked up at Ember, who hovered above her, wings outstretched. Their eyes met, and she felt a promise, a bond that would never be broken. The fleet had returned, but more importantly, the girl who had once saved a tiny hatchling had been recognized as something extraordinary. The suspense was over, but the story was just beginning. The dragons had returned, and Alara's life had changed forever. The sun rose, casting golden light across the village and the forest. The air was filled with a mixture of awe and calm. The dragon fleet had arrived the previous day, and the villagers had finally begun to understand the incredible truth. These creatures were not here to harm them. They were here to honor Alara. Alara stood at the center of the dragon circle, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and humility. Ember hovered above her, his massive wings flaring slightly, casting shadows on the ground. The other dragons formed a perfect circle around them, their eyes glowing warmly in the morning light. Every scale shimmered like precious gemstones, and the ground trembled gently under their presence. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. This was no longer the girl who had bravely waded into a flood years ago. She was someone chosen, someone special, someone who had earned the loyalty of dragons. And Ember, her first friend, her protector, and her companion, was here to make it official. Ember landed gracefully in front of her and lowered his massive head. Alara reached out, placing her hand on his snout. Sparks flickered faintly from his nostrils, not as a warning, but as a sign of recognition, a seal of trust. The other dragons, one by one, bowed their heads as Ember nudged her gently with his snout. "It is time," Alara whispered, her voice shaking slightly. She felt a strange energy in the air, as if the dragons themselves were alive with anticipation. She looked around. The villagers, still watching from a safe distance, could hardly believe their eyes. Fear had turned into reverence. Awe had replaced doubt. And in the center of it all stood Alara, the girl who had once saved a tiny dragon hatchling. Then, Ember rose into the air, circling slowly above her. The others followed, creating a swirling formation that glinted in the sunlight. Their wings beat in unison, producing a powerful rhythm that seemed to echo across the valley. The ground shook slightly, the sound of 100 wings filling the sky. And then Ember dove down, landing in front of Alara once more. With a gentle nudge, Ember pressed his forehead against hers. A warm, golden light flickered around them, visible only to her. It was a bond, an acknowledgement, a promise. She felt power and love, trust and loyalty, all at once. The dragons around them roared, not in aggression, but in celebration. The moment was complete. Alara raised her arms slightly, a gesture she didn't quite understand, but it felt right. Ember's eyes glimmered with understanding, and the other dragons slowly approached her, circling closer and bowing their heads again. It was done. She had been named the Empress of the Dragon Fleet. The villagers, witnessing the spectacle, slowly approached. Some fell to their knees in awe. Others whispered her name in reverence. The dragons did not attack. They were protectors now, loyal to Alara alone. Children ran to see the dragons up close, and even the elders smiled, their fears replaced by wonder. Alara turned to Ember, her heart swelling. "We did it," she said softly. "Together, we did it." Ember let out a soft roar, almost like a laugh, as if acknowledging the journey they had shared. From the flood to the hidden forest, from the years of waiting to this moment, they had come full circle. For the first time in many years, Alara felt completely at peace. She looked up at the dragons soaring above the village, her fleet, her friends, and her protectors. The wind carried their roars across the valley, a symphony of power and loyalty. She knew that life would not always be easy, that challenges would come, but she was ready. She was no longer just a girl. She was an empress, chosen by destiny and honored by dragons. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the valley, the villagers celebrated alongside her. Fires were lit, songs were sung, and laughter filled the air. Ember landed beside her one last time for the evening, resting his head gently against her shoulder. She hugged him tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. The story that had begun in a flood, with a tiny hatchling fighting for life, had reached its happy ending. But even in happiness, there was a sense of awe, of wonder, of adventure still waiting beyond the horizon. Alara had saved a dragon, and in return, a dragon had saved her world. The bond they shared would never break. The girl and her dragon, together with the fleet, would protect the valley, the villagers, and each other. And the legend of the girl who became Empress of the Dragon Fleet would live forever.